Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whether you're joining us for your first cup of coffee for the day, or you are just taking your sleep time tea. We're really excited to have everyone here with us today. My name is Liz Grossman-Kitoyi, and I'm the CEO of Baobab Consulting, and it's my distinguished honor to moderate today's discussion. So we'll begin in just a few minutes. So to all of our speakers, we can definitely wait to have you on video just for another few moments while everybody gets settled in. But in the meantime, I know it's difficult for us to not be in person, shaking hands, meeting with the people next to us. But what we want to do today is use the tools that we do have to connect with one another. So please feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself. Please let us know your name. Let us know where you are coming from. Let us know which organization you're from and any social media links you would like us to follow. And please refer to the program that was sent to you via the Eventbrite for information about our fabulous speakers and the organizers who are joining us today. And also use the social media toolkit to engage directly with our speakers. We want you to ask questions, we want you to engage, we want you to share your points of view. So we have the chat and we have social media to do so today. Thank you very much. We're going to be getting started in just a few minutes while some more people come into the room. So thank you very much. Excellent. I see Spain is joining us. I see Lagos. I see Mozambique. I see Rwanda. I see Phoenix, Arizona. That's an early wake up time. Thank you for joining us, Carmen. We have Nigeria, Rwanda. Keep them coming. And please share your profiles with us. Kenya, thank you. Another Kenya. Excellent. Welcome, welcome. Addis Ababa, Gambia. Isn't it a blessing in disguise that we are able to convene people from all across the world just using our technology? Thank you so much for joining us. Charlotte, North Carolina. Dubai. Côte d'Ivoire. Les francophones sont là. La Belgique. Togolais, Algérie. Excellent. So I've had a request. Can everybody please change your send to option to all panelists and attendees? Don't just share it with the panelists, share it with everyone. Thank you. We have Philadelphia. That's where I'm originally from. So great to see that. London. Kenya, San Francisco, New York, Ghana, Canada, Cape Town, Nigeria. Wonderful. This is really, really exciting. Uganda, India, Kinshasa, Kigali, wow, Chicago, DC. This is becoming a lot. We're so excited. Sarasota, excellent. Iowa, Nebraska. Wow, this is truly an international convening and we are so excited to have you. Wonderful. Great. Senegal. Nanga def Senegal. Yangi si jam. Lagos, Nigeria. Wonderful. So without further ado, as people still get settled in, again, please, please connect with others. We want this to be a conversation. We have Johannesburg in the house. So we want this to be a conversation, and we want you to be able to share your thoughts and your views to drive this discussion. So please use this wonderful chat. I see Mauritius is present, San Jose is present. Use this chat, share your links, and tweet, post, tell stories, Instagram, LinkedIn, whichever platform you want. We want you to be sharing and contributing your thoughts to this. So now that we're all getting settled in, I hope you've had a chance to introduce yourself. And we're really honored today to have people from all around the world, but also people with real power to drive change. We have people from the government, we have policymakers, we have donors and investors, we have the media, we have entrepreneurs themselves. So thank you again for joining us. Today, we're convened to talk about investing in African women entrepreneurs. Now, before the pandemic, we saw global trends, we saw continental trends. Investing in African women is a big, big part of policy. But what is going to happen now with revenues dropping and a global health crisis in front of us? SMEs, particularly ones that are run by women, are struggling to stay open. And today, this discussion is going to give us practical solutions and action points that we can take in order to address this gap. Today's discussion is driven by SME.NG, and SME.NG is an impact investment platform that invests in Nigerian SMEs to realize measurable environmental and social and financial returns. We're really excited to be partnering with SME.NG for this. The second partner is the funding space, and the funding space is a global convening which happens in Nigeria that brings together donors, investors, governments, policymakers, all towards really supporting women to access the funding and resources that they need in order to scale their business. I was lucky last year to be in Nigeria and to moderate one of the panels at this event, and that's how I was introduced to this wonderful organization and this wonderful platform. So it's an honor to be here today with them. And I am the CEO of Baobab Consulting, the third partner of this event. And Baobab Consulting is an Africa-focused social impact firm that offers services in communications, strategic advisory and research, and intercultural programming. I personally am based in Brooklyn, New York, but our team is based remotely across 7 different countries around the world. So I'm happy to have some of my teammates joining us from Johannesburg, from Senegal, from Rwanda and Kenya and beyond. So without further ado, I know why we are really all here is not to listen to me, but it is to listen to some of our amazingly brilliant speakers today. So without further ado, I would like to introduce today's keynote, Her Excellency, Ameenah Gurib Fakim, the 6th President of the Republic of Mauritius. She is a true champion of fellow women. She has supported women entrepreneurs, including myself, across the world by providing valuable advice, guidance, and access to resources. As an entrepreneur herself, she knows firsthand these challenges, and she also knows what it is like to grow a movement, to grow a business, and to lead a nation. So without further ado, I would like to invite Her Excellency to turn on her video and and join us. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Liz, and good morning or good evening or good afternoon from across the world. And it is indeed a great pleasure to be with you today. And thank you, Liz, for putting this together, because it's a very important conversation for our women on the African continent. Ladies and gentlemen, this year, 2020, marks the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Platform for Action. And as we know, this was intended to be groundbreaking for gender equality. Instead, with the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic, even the limited gains made in the past decades are at risk of being rolled back. The pandemic is exposing and deepening pre-existing inequalities and vulnerabilities in the social, political, and economic systems, which are in turn amplifying the impacts of the pandemic. Emerging evidence on the impact of COVID-19 suggests that women's economic and productive lives will be affected disproportionately. Across the globe, women already earn less, save less, and hold less secure jobs, and are more likely to be employed in the informal sector. They have less access to social protections, often are the majority of single-parent households, and their capacity to absorb economic shocks is therefore much less than that of men. As women take on greater care demands at home, their jobs will also be disproportionately affected by cuts and layoffs. Such impacts risk rolling back the already fragile gains made in female labor force participation, limiting women's ability to support themselves and their families, especially for female-headed households. The situation is worse in developing economies, where the vast majority of women employment, 70%, is in the informal economy, with few protections against dismissal or for paid sick leave and limited access to social protection. To earn a living, these workers often depend on public space and social interactions, which are now being restricted to contain the spread of the pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, throughout human history, crises have been pivotal in developing our societies. Pandemics have helped advance healthcare systems. Wars have fueled technological innovation, and the global financial crisis helped advance tech companies like Uber and Airbnb. I feel that the present coronavirus pandemic will arguably not be an exception. Entrepreneurs can be expected to rise to the challenge, especially female entrepreneurs. Businesses play a key role both in helping society get through the economic crisis and in creating innovations that shape society after a crisis. So one key question is, how will the ongoing crisis influence future society? Ladies and gentlemen, women contributions are not negligible, and Africa is the only region in the world where more women than men choose to become entrepreneurs, a phenomenon that is by itself not the subject of adequate discussions. Maybe we should be engaging more in that space. Expanding the opportunities for female entrepreneurs through policies that foster gender equality would have tremendous impact on Africa's growth. Simple and inexpensive solutions have been proven effective and should be adopted on a wider scale. While both male and female entrepreneurs face such constraint as a lack of capital, women are specifically impacted by a number of obstacles, such as discrimination and dearth of collateral. As a result, female-owned enterprises post monthly profit that are, on average, 38% lower than those of male-owned enterprises. Three factors account in part for this underperformance: the lack of capital, the choice of business sector, and commercial practices. Data collected in 10 African countries indicate on average, male-owned enterprises have 6 times more capital than female-owned enterprises. The fact that women have less access to assets affects their ability to obtain medium-sized loans and in turn impacts the growth of their enterprises. This problem, however, can be counteracted in 2 ways: by giving women more control over assets through, for example, the granting of joint property rights, as in the case of Rwanda, or by eliminating the need for collateral. Ladies and gentlemen, in Africa, female entrepreneurs tend to confine themselves to the traditionally female sectors, not just because of the lack of skills or access to capital, but rather a lack of information. Women are often unaware of the fact that they earn less than men and other social factors. Also, one study conducted in Uganda indicated that women who during their youth had male mentors who encouraged them to consider sectors reserved for men are more inclined to make foray into these sectors. In Guinea and the Republic of Congo, programs that encourage women to transition towards traditionally male-dominated sectors by providing them with appropriate information, mentoring programs, amongst others, are currently being tested. Also, training aimed at fostering proactive behaviors among entrepreneurs rather than teaching them basic commercial skills can have significant impacts. The idea is to teach small entrepreneurs to show initiative, be proactive, and demonstrate perseverance. In the wake of COVID-19, what are the economic measures that we need to put in place? Everything we do during and after COVID-19 crisis must aim to build more equal, inclusive, and sustainable economies and societies. This is perhaps the clearest lesson emerging from this pandemic. This includes gender-responsive economic and social policies and placing women's economic lives at the heart of the pandemic response and recovery plans. Beyond this, the whole range of economic policies for both immediate response and long-term recovery need to be designed and implemented with a gender lens. This includes removal of barriers that prevent full involvement of women in economic activities, equal pay, equal opportunities, social protection schemes that factor in existing biases, financing for women entrepreneurs, and mechanisms to promote women's self-employment. Such economic responses would include both the public and the private spheres. Equally, narrowing gender-based education gaps and ensuring women remain in and expand their participation in the formal labor market will play a significant role in providing many economies with the capacity to rebound with stronger, more equitable, and sustainable growth. Lastly, current social protection systems are not wide enough. Many women will not have access as safety nets frequently depend on formal participation in the labor force. In the sub-Saharan region, 74% of women are in non-agriculture jobs and hence participate in informal employment. The service sector, tourism, hospitality, is reeling under restriction as it employs 55% of women as opposed to 44% of women. So women are more adversely impacted. Women entrepreneurs are often discriminated against when attempting to access credit. This will be a challenge as credit will be of paramount importance in the survival of firms. Without open and favorable lines of credit, many female entrepreneurs will be forced to close their business. Access to benefits such as health insurance, paid sick leave, maternity leave, pensions, and unemployment benefits need to reach beyond formal employment and be accessible to women in all spheres of work. As government takes steps to address the economic and social effects of COVID-19, they should not let it reverse the gender equality progress achieved in recent decades. To avoid this, we must retain women's productive participation in the labor force, something we did not do in the aftermath of the 2008 global financial crisis. Government bailouts and support measures should not only prop up large and medium-sized enterprises, but also micro and small businesses where women entrepreneurs are relatively more represented. In addition, private sector financial support and access to credit should be equally available to men and women. More transparency and a simplification of public procurement processes would also help women businesses to benefit from increased government support. The reallocation of public funds should avoid any possible increase in the burden of women as principal suppliers of unpaid work. The coronavirus pandemic presents us with an opportunity to effect systemic changes that could protect women from bearing the heaviest brunt of shocks like these in the future. Improve education, training opportunities for women, would facilitate the shift from precarious jobs to more stable and better protected employment. Gender-responsive trade policies would open new opportunities to women as employees and entrepreneurs. Broader provision of social services would lift women's care burden and give them more time for paid jobs and leisure. Flexible work arrangements currently in practice in response to the pandemic should continue beyond it and provide a new model of shared responsibilities within households. Our ability to bounce back from this crisis is dependent on how we include everyone equally. If more women take part in shaping a new social and economic order, chances are that it will be more responsive to everyone's need and make us all more resilient to future shocks. Ladies and gentlemen, it is clear that actions during the crisis will shape our institutions and firm in the long run. First, the crisis creates opportunities for business to become more innovative. Facing external pressures, some business leaders are stepping out of their routines and comfort zone to become creative problem solvers. Along the way, they rediscover their entrepreneurial spirit. Some will continue to pursue opportunities first identified during the crisis. Perhaps, for example, some automotive suppliers will be making medical equipment, while service providers integrate new online interfaces with their traditional businesses. Second, reputations are built and lost during times of crisis. Companies demonstrating good citizenship by helping with shortages or by making major donations, also probably hoping that the consumers will remember their actions when the economy returns to normal. What's more, treating employees well during a time of hardship enhances the company's reputation as an employer and helps attract talents as well as building a loyal workforce. On the other hand, there are also a lot of opportunities to ruin a reputation. Companies that treat their employees or customers badly during a crisis will face major challenges rebuilding when the storm has passed. Similarly, if corporate behemoths like, for example, Amazon, fail to provide a reliable logistics solution to small businesses right now, then others will develop competing platforms. Those platforms will not only enable buyers and sellers to meet, but will also integrate service providers to transport products in a timely and reliable manner. It is clear that beyond existing firms, some sectors of the economy are likely to grow. New technologies can and should offer numerous opportunities as the crisis transforms the product or services they can offer. Service businesses in particular are likely to see a lot of innovation in how services are created, packaged, and sold. Here we find that artificial intelligence is helping hospital emergency rooms. So virtual reality can move from an entertainment tool to a valuable resources for technical training and maintenance. Companies that become competent and move quickly in these areas during the crisis will have a strategic advantage over their competitors in the post-pandemic economy. For example, whoever builds the most reliable and speedy logistics infrastructure for delivering goods to private homes during the lockdown is likely to gain loyal customers. So ladies and gentlemen, there is also the consumer pull. Customers, both individual consumers and businesses, are being accustomed to new forms of business, such as online ordering for home delivery. Their established habits have been disrupted, changing attitude and expectations. For example, the surge in video meetings like we're having right now creates comfort with this method of interaction, and users learn how to be effective in meetings without face-to-face interactions. After the shutdown, many people will expect more integration of online and offline offerings. This will likely be more at ease with using new technologies, especially video conferencing that can also reduce travel costs and carbon emissions. It's clear the post-pandemic future will be different. What's happening during the crisis will have a lasting impact on society. Current signs of entrepreneurial initiative and goodwill will give us some cause for optimism. And as Paul Romer, the Stanford economist, had said, and I quote, "A crisis is a terrible thing to waste." Thank you for your attention.
very much, Your Excellency. I think there's like, I hear the applause coming from around the world. There's a lot of people thanking us and thanking you for this amazing speech. We're really, really grateful. There are a few questions that I wanted us to talk about. So one of them is, obviously we know that you travel quite a bit and you're going around the world and speaking. So we'd like to hear your thoughts on the airline industry and the tourism industry. How are specifically women entrepreneurs who are in that industry going to be affected, and what advice do you have for them in this time? We have speech clapping.
Thank you. Already in my country, the tourism sector contributes directly 9 points. But if you look at the aggregate industries around the tourism sector, we are talking about 23% of the GDP. And women are highly present in any hospitality, and especially the tourism sector, be guides, be working as waitresses in the hotels, and you name it, they are there, even providing logistics services in terms of fruits and vegetables also to the hotel industry. So as I said, these women will be very, very badly impacted. Now, having said this, the tourism sector is not dead. The airline sector is not dead. They will have to reinvent themselves because, as I said, we are witnessing already how beautiful the skies are in some parts of the world. We are also experiencing clean air. Of course, all these cities, all these environments have been impacted by, partly, of course, the airline industry. So I think there will be a rethink into how these sectors, these two major sectors, the tourism industry and of course the airline industries, how they will wake up and how they will have to reinvent themselves post-pandemic. Now, how women have been performing, at least in my country, those women who are in these sectors, for example, that have been providing the logistics support for vegetable, flowers, and all the rest of it, they have all gone online. And they are making home deliveries, and they're actually making the most of the bandwidth. And they have been very, very active. They have been very nimble-footed in moving themselves to keep on delivering. And I myself have benefited from home delivery of fruits, vegetables, even cooked food items, which are coming across online through online order. So I think what we have to do in these instances is look at opportunities that, for example, the Zoom infrastructure is providing to retrain these women. They don't want any academic exercise. They want to be given tips of how they can move about, provide them with very good ideas of how the business can move, can shape itself within this framework of the pandemic. And I'm certain that now that they have started 6 weeks now, we have been in lockdown in Mauritius, they have started to get to grips with how the business will shape up. And some of them, they have also been working in developing kind of cascading their business to the smaller businesses, the smaller enterprises in Mauritius that can provide them with all the ingredients, for example, for the cooking. And they are looking at better packaging, they're getting at better logistics to have these products delivered. So I think here, just like tackling this pandemic, women enterprises, women entrepreneurs, they'll have to be nimble-footed. They have to move very, very fast. And just like, as I said, tackling the pandemic from as a crisis, those countries that have been successful in managing this pandemic, they are those who have been nimble-footed. They are those who have gone in early and they have gone hard. So the same thing will happen to a lot of these small businesses. They will find ways of reorienting the talent and, of course, reorienting the business model so that they can do more with less. And, of course, they will capitalize on the online infrastructure. So this is the messaging with what we see coming out of Mauritius, and I'm sure in other places. this will also be the case. And also, Liz, there is something that we have seen operating in Cameroon, for example, that kind of developing the platform, for example, blockchain infrastructure in some of these countries. A lot of these farm producers can log into the system. They can make themselves known, and people can then know what produce they have got in store, and how this can then be deployed to sectors, to countries, to regions that don't have it. So these are all the possibilities which are emerging out of this crisis. And I think that once we come out of this, we will definitely find ways of addressing the business model differently.
Thank you. There are so many questions for you. I think what we'll have to do is maybe compile those at the end and share them with you, and we can figure out how we can address those questions after our limited time, because we are checking on the clock. But I just want to close with you and just ask, what is one thing that you can advise all of us on this call to take and to do in order to support women entrepreneurs in Africa? A diverse group of people here. What is one thing that you can all do?
You know, many governments are providing stimulus packages to countries, institutions, multilateral institutions. They're all providing all these stimulus packages. They're all going through banks. Again, we are going to be denying these packages to some of the deserving women who are operating in the informal sector. So the messaging I have is, when these stimulus packages are there, we have to ensure that those hairdressers, that these ladies doing, for example, hairdressing, who are out of work, they also have access to these stimulus packages so that they can maintain their business and pay at least the basic cost to the staff. I mean, I'm just taking one example, but there's so many of them. So my message is that all these multilateral organizations, all these government bodies who are actually deploying all these stimulus packages, please make sure that those women operating in the informal sector, they can access it without having to provide collateral, without having to provide whatever it is in terms of guarantees, so that they can support the businesses, pay some of the basic salaries, and stay in business, and of course, come back again once the pandemic is over. So that's my plea to organizations: make sure that these women have the support that they need, that they deserve right now.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We really appreciate it. I'm thinking everyone can have their global applause for you right now. Thank you. Yeah, I see some claps coming from the chat, but it was truly a pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to the next conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. I'll take leave because I have another Zoom after this.
You're a busy Zoom. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone for your comments and your questions. I know there were many of them that we didn't have time to address, but we will definitely figure out a way to keep the conversation going. So it is without further ado that I would like to invite all of our esteemed panelists to show yourself, turn on your video so I can please introduce this wonderful panel. Excellent. I see some wonderful faces coming on. So I would like to officially welcome all of our panelists. Thank you for joining us. I will begin by introducing Ms. Thelma Ekiyor, who is the managing partner of SME.NG and one of the conveners of this amazing event. So thank you, Thelma, for joining us. Thelma has over 20 years of experience working in the development sector as an impact investor, donor, philanthropic advisor, nonprofit practitioner, and a social entrepreneur. We are really blessed to have her here. And please remember that everyone's bios with all of their amazing accomplishments are in your program. But Thelma, welcome. Thank you very much for being here with us. The first question I would like to ask you is, what is your organization doing now during this time?
Thank you, Liz. That was an excellent keynote and setting the stage for us. As the organizer of this webinar, with Baobab. I just want to welcome everyone from across the world. I think the diversity and the different countries just validates the importance of this conversation. Let me start by saying, a member of my family this morning said, women, 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 why are we talking about women? This pandemic is affecting everyone. And I think by hosting this webinar, we're in no means minimizing the effect to men as well. I think what we're doing is addressing it from the sector where we work and prefer solutions from that angle. And I think if everyone does the same from their sector, then we'll have a holistic response. For us as SME.NG, because we're an impact investment platform and we're focused on women, the first thing we wanted to do was really understand the magnitude of the problem. Everyone talks about how coronavirus would completely destroy women's businesses, but we didn't want guesswork or anecdotal impact. We wanted empirical evidence. And so we partnered with the Ministry of Women's Affairs and the National Association of Chambers of Commerce to conduct a national survey, talking to thousands of women's businesses to say, okay, immediate impact. What is the immediate impact? Because one of the challenges we have in our work is lack of data. And so people are responding based on how they feel or based on what they think. But we wanted data to back whatever response that we were going to do as a company, but also be able to provide that data to the government and other development partners in Nigeria to say, if you're going to intervene with women entrepreneurs, let it be informed, let it be targeted, and let it have the voice of women, which usually what happens is people ask women after the fact, but this time we wanted to come up with something that would be tracking the impact as the virus evolves. Then the other thing we did was really to look at ourselves as a company and say, the world has changed. We have to change with it. And so we designed innovative packages in our investment strategy, because we can't invest like it's business as usual, like nothing happened. And so our investment packages are looking at how do you help with more immediate injection of capital, as well as looking at long-term capital. And then lastly, we also organized another webinar previously where we basically were just helping entrepreneurs, because I can't tell you how many text messages I get saying, look, am I going to survive this? I'm really, I feel like this is going to kill my business. And if not careful, kill me. So you find that as an investor, you're also playing the role of a pastor or some type or imam, talking people through this difficulty and saying, you will come out on the other side. And being relevant, I think very important. Every company and institution has to be relevant during this period. I think the stronger companies are the ones that will survive. And when you take some type of audit of what role you played, I think it'd be important to be on the side of being a solution provider. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thelma. In the spirit of this being a women discussion on women, I'm going to go next to Almaz. So sorry for the gentlemen. We're going to give a little bit of preferential treatment to the ladies today. So it is my distinguished honor to introduce Almaz Negash, who is the founder and executive director of the African Diaspora Network. She's joining us from Silicon Valley. And in 2010, Almaz founded the African Diaspora Network to inform and engage Africans in the diaspora and facilitate direct collaboration with social entrepreneurs, innovators, and business leaders on the continent. She is the convener of the African Diaspora Investment Symposium, which is a fabulous event held in Silicon Valley that connects investors to the entrepreneurs who are looking actively for funding. So it is my distinguished pleasure to ask Almaz, tell us, what is ADN doing now in the wake of this pandemic?
Liz, so good to see you. I know Signe, so good to see you too. So wonderful morning. And Thelma, wonderful opportunity to have this discussion, not just only because it's COVID-19. I think we should have this conversation every day, all the time, because I think women are most of the time impacted whether it's COVID-19 or in general. I think women are generally just absolutely on the bottom of the scale when you think about, especially Africa and other parts of the world. What is ADN doing? I think COVID-19, if anything, is what Thelma said. We had to pivot quickly to become relevant to the community we serve. So I was telling Liz earlier, before we had this open discussion, ADN hosted 4 webinars in the last 4 weeks. How we do it, it's just that because I know people are in pain. My heart goes out to those who have lost their lives and their livelihood. I feel very fortunate to have what I have. And the question is, what can I do to contribute to the community as a whole, the community where we live and the continent where I come from? And the fantastic thing about ADN is the people that I have in my hand. So over the last few weeks, I've been reaching out to Thelma to understand what's happening on the ground, because I am in Silicon Valley, one of the richest regions in the world, where I also see suffering. And I'm thinking, if Silicon Valley, I mean, the United States can have this challenge dealing with COVID, what is Africa going to do when there is only one doctor for 10,000 people, one doctor at times for 5,000 people? I mean, we're talking about a magnitude that nobody has ever seen before. My hope is that people like Thelma and then CD, I know what you're doing around the continent, would actually make an impact. But at the same time, we want to join you. And what we are doing at ADN is to contribute to what you're doing on the ground by engaging the diaspora and Friends of Africa. The diaspora is committed to the community where we live, because the diaspora is very generous. We know Africa is right now suffering, so are Southeast Asian countries and Latin America, because remittances are low. Remittances are low because people are losing their job and their livelihood wherever they are residing. So I think it is not, if I'm learning anything about this COVID-19 is how we must learn from this and change the way in which business is done. Remittances are fantastic when you get them, but do they create a sustainable community? We need to continue to have that discussion, and ADN is trying to have that discussion. We've done for 10 years, informing and engaging. We're now going to come out very aggressively to act to the community, to ask the community to act. It is time for ADN to act, to make some difference in the community. I am working with Thelma on a project that she's developing. So that's on Nigeria's side. But what are we gonna do continentally? I have to give back the credit to Thelma. She's helping us to really think through what can we do. And I am reaching out to people like CD to understand what would that look like. But ADN will continue to convene, and we had a fantastic discussion yesterday, which we will share through our newsletter and social, the newsletter and social media, to share with you the discussion we had on COVID-19, specifically on the healthcare. We had a Gates Foundation, people from formerly with Johnson & Johnson, Roche. What could we be better? I think the diaspora is ready to support. The question always is, what are we going to do and who are we supporting? And do we know whether what we give is going to go and benefit the very community for which we're trying to raise the money? So with that, I am very grateful, and I look forward to learning more and contributing what I can.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Global round of applause. Okay, thank you very much, Almaz. It's really inspiring, and to hear all that you've been able to do despite the lockdown. So keep it up.
Thank you, thank you. If you see me, if you lose me, it's simply because I have to get out a little bit before 8 o'clock. But okay. I will get to hear from you. We have a board meeting exactly to do what I said, to act. What are we going to do to turn all this engagement that we have done, the social capital that we've developed, to turn it into action? And just stay tuned, and I will reach out to you. So I'll stay and listen to CD.
Thank you. All right, so without further ado, I would like to introduce CD Glin, who is the president and CEO of the U.S. African Development Foundation, which is a public corporation established by U.S. Congress to support and invest in African-owned and led enterprises to promote inclusive economic growth and create pathways to shared prosperity for underserved Communities, what a beautiful mission, and I'm so proud that to have you here. I'm really excited to hear more about what we're doing on our side as Americans, and how we can get involved with your work. So without further ado, please let us know what USADF is up to.
Thanks, Liz. Really an honor and pleasure to be here. Thelma, great to meet you virtually. Heard a lot about your work, and Almaz and Landry, my friends, my sister, my brother. It's good to see you guys. Liz, you have a great panel. I mean, I'm actually blushing. You can't tell. Just having to follow Her Excellency, and then Thelma, and then Almaz. It's a tough act to follow. But the men can eat last. It's totally fine. And I think Landry and I will play cleanup to some of what has been shared. As you said, USADF is on the front lines of supporting grassroots enterprises, entrepreneurs throughout the continent. We provide direct seed capital and capacity building support, as well as real connections for African enterprises and entrepreneurs. And we really focus around underserved, vulnerable populations and people and communities. And so women are at the forefront of a lot of what we support. COVID has been, let me just say, COVID is the latest challenge, but it won't be the last. And these communities that are facing this shock, these African women entrepreneurs that are facing this shock, this is compounded with other shocks that they were already currently facing. As being women and women leaders and women entrepreneurs, this is a compounding effect. So you have women and communities that are facing conflict daily. In the places that I operate and work with USADF, we are in Burkina Faso, which has conflict since 2012 and beyond, and now COVID comes, but they also face things around climate change. I see, shout out to all my people in Kenya and Nairobi, where I spent 6 years before coming to USADF, the whole East African region in terms of agriculture and locusts. So climate change is really devastating these communities. And so on top of conflict and climate change, now you have COVID. So African women are resilient. They are the backbones of African economies. They are going to get through this, and they will survive, they will adapt, and they will thrive in the face of these shocks and these stressors, but they won't do it alone. So USADF is on the front lines, Liz, and you should be proud as an American, if you will, and all those on the call, that there is a U.S. African Development Foundation, an agency dedicated exclusively to investing in African ideas and African solutions, African designed and delivered solutions. So our funding goes directly to African organizations, and in this instance, directly, we're having a real focus around what we're doing with African women, and particularly African women enterprises, run enterprise and entrepreneurs. So just to go through 3 quick things that we are really doing, and it's a testament to our agility, our ability to move fast, our focus in being demand responsive. We don't talk about African women, we talk to them and we listen to them. And so they have a voice and a vote in our efforts. And so they are on the front lines of helping instruct what we are going to do. So our agility allows us to respond, but we're demand responsive to demands that we're hearing from the enterprises and entrepreneurs that are run predominantly by women on the continent. And so we're looking at this as a health issue and as an economic issue. And the health issue sort of says, let's focus on lives and making sure we're saving lives and who are on the front line facing a health challenge. And let's also address livelihoods. And this is where the economics, so that you have to live through this and then go ahead and survive after this. And so we're looking at a 3-pronged approach. And the first effort is very similar to what you saw coming out of the US Congress with the CARES Act. So USADF has a CARES program, and this is Capital for African Resilience Building and Enterprise Support. So CARES, capital, working capital for African enterprise resilience, for African resilience building and enterprise support. And this is a direct injection of capital into more than 300 of the enterprise and entrepreneurs that we support throughout the continent. So this is new capital going directly to them to help them get through this first phase to respond to COVID. So immediate injection of capital into their businesses. We know these early stage entrepreneurs, women have smaller businesses, they grow slower. And so this shock, the economic shock of COVID is going to damage them in ways that somewhat may be irreparable if we don't act fast. And so we had our own injection stimulus package into the enterprise and entrepreneurs to help them address salary shortage, business continuity issues, shutdowns that they may be facing, but giving them immediate access to capital. So that was the immediate response. And we're doing that throughout the continent with, again, 300 plus enterprises, direct capital. Then the other opportunity for all of us to rally around is a reconfiguration. This is so there's a response effort, but now there's a reconfiguring business models. Her Excellency mentioned this, Thelma mentioned on it, as did Almaz. These are sort of new business models in the face of COVID-19, where African enterprises, women-run, women entrepreneurs need to reconfigure their business models to be more responsive. And I'll go through some quick examples of how business models are changing so that they can help communities and organizations not only survive and adapt to COVID, but thrive in the face of it. So Ajo Asar is a young woman. She was a part of the YALI program, the Young African Leaders Initiative program. We provided her grant funding to help grow her business. She has a growing manufacturing and fashion business. She's now reconfiguring her business model to make not only nice dresses out of wooden cloth and kente cloth and smock cloth throughout Ghana. She's reconfiguring her business model now to make masks. And so masks in the face of COVID-19, so PPP equipment, and that's Ajo in Ghana, who's doing fashion and now is looking at PPP equipment using her business. You have Gahaya Links in Rwanda. So Gahaya Links is world-renowned for their baskets that were sold into Macy's all around the world, a grantee of USADF, who now is also pivoting the women. They have more than 5,000 women engaged in handicrafts and basket. We know the tourism and handicraft industry is being devastated through COVID. And so now Gahaya Links, through the Rwandan government, has been an authorized provider of PPE equipment, and so supporting them to, again, reconfigure their business model to be responsive in this immediate need. Think about all of the shea butter producers, all the palm oil producers. We fund hundreds of them throughout the continent. We're looking at them reconfiguring their businesses to provide soap to communities and washing stations and water in these communities, again, to help communities get through this early stage of COVID. Hygiene is more important than it's ever been, and that is something that's really important for us to be on the front line. And so helping these enterprises, these cooperatives that are women-run predominantly, helping them reconfigure their business models to address the challenge of COVID. Really quickly, we've run an off-grid energy challenge for a past couple of years, USADF. We focus around energy poverty, energy access, and this is solar home solutions. These are off-grid, mini-grid solutions. We now, and a lot of them, we had an off-grid energy challenge that was exclusively focused around women and women energy entrepreneurs. Now those women energy entrepreneurs are reconfiguring their business models to do installations for isolation centers, for rural health clinics. And so they're bringing access and power to communities, but they're also bringing this to hospitals and rural health clinics because that's what's needed right now. And lastly, in Nigeria, we are supporting and working with the Lagos State Employment Trust Fund. And the Lagos State Employment Trust Fund and USADF collaboratively are funding a number of vocational training schools. And House of Tara, which is one of the continent-wide and Nigeria-wide, sort of, it's the MAC or the Sephora of Africa, where women beauty schools, more than 26 beauty schools and vocational training centers for informal to formal beauty business. We want to make sure they still stay alive, if you will, and thrive in the face of this, but we also want to ensure that they are able to actually open their operations. So they have to take care of their people and customers. So they need sanitizer, all of a sudden. They need washing stations, all of a sudden. They need PPE gear to actually operate. And so these business models are having to adapt in the face of COVID. And so the response is there, the reconfiguration is there. And lastly, we want to reimagine businesses, and we want to be supportive with grant capital and capacity building support and connections amongst women so that they can reimagine business post-COVID. And this reimagination goes to what Her Excellency said, what Thelma mentioned, what Almaz mentioned around building resilient businesses. And a lot of them will be tech-enabled. They will look at digitization in new ways. They will be service-oriented. They will look at online delivery. And so how can we be on the front lines of looking at what level of support we can provide to African women entrepreneurs who are thinking about business reimagined for themselves post-COVID? So from a response effort, from a reconfiguration effort, and from reimagining resilient businesses in the era of COVID, we're providing capital, we're providing capacity building support, and we're providing real connections amongst women so they can come together and not only survive, but adapt and thrive in the face of COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, making me proud to be an American. Thank you. At least we're doing something. Great. So I would like to now introduce Professor Landry Signe, and how I'm going to introduce him today is not by reading his impressive bio, but rather by reading a quote from Mo Ibrahim about his new book, which was launched on yesterday, or was it Tuesday?
Tuesday.
Yesterday. So really, we're live here with a fresh new book. And Dr. Mo Ibrahim said, Landry Signe's seminal book, Unlocking Africa's Business Potential, remarkably outlines why African markets could be at the top of the agenda for global business and entrepreneurs, and which strategies businesses and policymakers should adopt to improve governance of the economy and make business effectively contribute to Africa's economic transformation and sustainable and shared development. We are in debt to Landry Signe. Wow, that is Mo Ibrahim who said that. So Professor, would you please tell us a little bit about your book, and especially its relevance now? You didn't write this book with COVID in mind, so what, please share a bit more.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you very much, Liz, and to all the fabulous team. CD, I'm happy to see you. Thelma, Alma, and President Gurib, Fakim. So I think that this is an extraordinary event. So I have been very excited also to receiving the fresh new copy of the book, which was written before COVID, and which is extremely relevant now. Because the main argument of the book is that Africa has a tremendous economic potential, business and investment potential, which offers rewarding opportunities for global businesses, but also tremendous social and economic impact on the continent. So I examine 8 sectors for which productive investment could generate job creation, especially for young people and for women, as well as economic growth and diversification, and overall improve general welfare. So we may eventually have another session to discuss the book, but definitively I have about 11 trends that I identify from whether the population growth, the growth of the middle class, the business spending, the fast urbanization, the growth in the industries without smokestacks, which are ICT-based industries, the effort to close the infrastructure gap, the innovation to unlock the agricultural or the resource wealth perspective, the fast digitalization or increased technological innovation. As you know, New York City had more mobile phone subscribers than the entire continent of Africa in the late 90s. And now Africa has more than 700 million mobile phone subscribers. The improved business environment, among other factors, the fast regional integration, including with the African Continental Free Trade Area, which will be delayed given COVID-19. However, the continent is already committed to accelerate those transformations, and the role of the diaspora and of the friends of Africa, who are playing a critical role in contributing to unlock Africa potential. And sectors which are covered include agriculture, agri-industry, information and communication technology, tourism, construction and infrastructure, consumer market, among other sectors.
Great, thank you very much, Professor. So I guess what I'd like to hear from you is what are some of your policy recommendations for governments, for people who are in the position to make policy right now? What would you tell them to do?
Many things. So perhaps I want to highlight a couple of things briefly. The thing that Brookings is doing, for example, high quality research, policy research, with 3 different goals. One of the goals is like policy policy adoption. That's at the highest level. So we engage with high-level policy maker. Some of the options which were provided in the case of Africa were adopted, for example, by the African Union and by some member states. So including related to debt relief with the G20. So many of the solutions adopted were initiated at the Brookings and in partnership with other institution, including the United Nations Economic Commission on Africa. So that is the level of policy adoption, but we also have the level of agenda setting. How do we frame overall the issue? How do we bridge the world of science, the world of policy, and the world of implementation? So that is extremely important. And finally, awareness raising. As you know, at the beginning of the crisis, many people were saying, oh, Africa will not be touched. So I recently published in a piece on in foreign policy, in the Foreign Policy magazine, especially explaining why, whether the level of incidence in Africa, of COVID-19 incidence in Africa is high or no, Africa will be drastically affected, especially economically speaking, given three broader factors, which include the external shock, so the disruption of the global value chain, including likely to have an impact around minus 2 to 5% of growth on the continent. So the World Bank thinks that this may be the first time over a quarter of century that Africa will be in recession. So we also have the domestic shock, among other factors, including the direct impact of COVID. Many of the African countries had a limited preparedness, and we already know that there's a high incidence of both infectious and non-communicable diseases on the continent. So this is another factor, and President Gurib Fakim spoke about tourism and how tourism has been impacted on the continent. So I think the International Labour Organization has identified about up to 22 million of jobs will be lost on the continent. 19 to 22 million of jobs will be lost on the continent only in 2020. And when we know that the continent needs every year about 20 million jobs, so this is really problematic. So that is one of the things that we do at Brookings. And in terms of concrete policy recommendation, I think a COVID-19 Africa Women Relief Fund should be created in every single country, in every single city, at the continental level and at the global level as well. Extremely important to have specific measure for women. So not just the broader fund and then deciding within those funds to assign part of those to women. No, it is extremely important for many reasons. First, a study in Foresight Africa released this year, we have seen that integrating, achieving equality in women, between women and men in terms of employment, in terms of entrepreneurship, could generate up to 50% higher GDP growth or broader economic activities in countries such as Niger. So I can expand later on this, but I have many other measures.
I know I could spend hours talking to you about this, but I would like, because you said something really important about this this fund for women. Thelma, can you step in and give your thoughts on that? How do you think that could look, having all governments dedicate actual funds to women?
First of all, I want to really commend CD. We did meet in Silicon Valley, and it's good to see you. And thanks for doing this. What USADF is doing is really what people need to study and change. I mean, USADF has been operational in Africa, so maybe it's easier for them, but to understand that people need influx of capital now. For women's businesses to survive, women's businesses are mostly businesses that do daily sales. And so, for example, in Nigeria, and most parts of Africa, to have been in lockdown for 5-6 weeks is devastating to these businesses. And so when people are talking about equity and capital or loans, and then you're talking about collateral and asking for all these things, it really is not thinking outside the box and recognizing the new environment that we're in is in the same way that medical experts are trying to look for a vaccine to stop the spread of the virus. We need an economic vaccine to mitigate the economic pillaging that the virus is going to bring on Africa. And so I was really happy to hear about how USADF is practically looking at helping women's businesses stay on track. I mean, of course, 300 businesses in Africa is not even a drop in the bucket, but it is, I think, what we're looking for are models that can be emulated, and this is a model that other governments should look at. In terms of the fund that Signe talked about, that Landry talked about, this is really strange because I belong to a group called Women Financing Women. It's a group of women-led funds here in Nigeria. And we actually wrote a letter to our central bank saying, with the stimulus package, the central bank should create a recovery fund for women. Because what we've learned, anyone who's worked on gender issues across the world and across Africa, you know that where you don't specifically create a measure for women, it will be overlooked, or it will be treated like, oh, well, it's gonna happen, but it never happens. So it was important for us to write to the central bank and say, you need to create a recovery fund for women. Now, the International Trade Corporation says that there are 4 stages of this pandemic, that there is the lockdown stage, and there will be the supply chain disruption stage, then there will be the demand depression stage, and lastly, the recovery stage. How do you transit businesses from the lockdown to the recovery? That is really what we need to talk about. It's not going to magically happen. Many of these businesses will never be able to go back into business. I've been talking to so many women entrepreneurs, and they're saying to me, the first thing they did was to let go of all the staff. That has a domino effect on unemployment, creating more unemployment. The next thing they did was look for how to deal with their inventory that was just staying in storage because no one was buying. And so you now have loss of stock that has been built months and years. That's real loss of revenue. Many of these women cannot access credit. So we need to really be creative as we think about helping women. And for me, it's not about an emotional need to help women. I believe that it's going to be an important indicator of how Africa has fared in this period of COVID-19. If women's businesses survive and they, by and large, were able to point to measures that were put in place to mitigate, then Africa has come out of this. Because when you talk about the fact that you have, that there is a phrase which I hate, but it's actually true, that the face of poverty in Africa is a woman's face. And so if you want to really deal with the issues of poverty, especially now that all our safety nets, all the weaknesses in our safety nets have been revealed through this virus, so poverty is going to be worse. The mitigation steps have to be practical and they have to be quick. Women cannot wait 5 weeks before you approve a loan for them to help their businesses. So when I hear people in government say, this is not what we do in terms of giving loans, I'm shocked. Clearly, you can't do what you used to do because the world has changed. You should be thinking another way, And, one of the reasons I listen to Signe in Silicon Valley, and I'm always happy to listen to people that are actually walking the talk. It's not about having this pot of money and no one sees what you're doing, but how are you practically changing lives on the ground? I think if we give policy recommendations to people today and also give practical recommendations to entrepreneurs of where they can go to get finance, we will not just be like all the million webinars that have been held. People will go home with something. And I think that's what I really like to happen through the discussions and the questions.
Liz, let me jump in there. Yeah, I got to publicly applaud.
Global tapping, great. Yes, thank you, Ms. Thelma. Yes.
Awesome. So Thelma mentioned some real practical things, and so did Landry. So one of the things that's happening that I want to make everyone aware of is that there's something called WGDP, the Women's Global Development and Prosperity Initiative. So this is a U.S. government initiative that now is run out of the White House, but also out of the Department of State. And there's something called the Academy for Women's Entrepreneurship, AWE. So USADF, as a government agency, a philanthropic organization, has committed $10 million to the Academy for Women's Entrepreneurship, $10 million where we're gonna invest directly in and provide technical assistance for 1,000 African women, particularly around 10 African countries. So it's specific to 10 African countries, but it goes directly to what Thelma was saying. And I mean, after her excellency, I could sit here and listen to Thelma all day because she's exactly right on all measures. We need actual practical solutions. Landry mentioned a fund. Academy for Women Entrepreneurship is a training program, online training program, but we're providing capital to that because we need integrated solutions. We need the training. Yes, women need the advisory services and support, but they also need the capital support. And then they need the mentorship and the network amongst each other because entrepreneurship alone is a lonely business. And so therefore having a cadre of women. And so one of the policy recommendations I often love is when governments do create networks and clusters and industry groups, because there needs to be shared understanding amongst many of the women on the front lines in terms of entrepreneurship and enterprise growth. But I did want to point out that the Academy for Women's Entrepreneurship, you can go to US government, State Department, Academy for Women's Entrepreneurship. If you want to learn anything about USADF, just go to info@usadf.gov. info@usadf.gov. And whether it's what we're doing with the Academy of Women's Entrepreneurship, what we're doing with an off-grid women energy challenge with All On in Nigeria is an impact investing entity that was affiliated with the chairwoman. And so they're doing transformational work in terms of women's energy, addressing energy poverty in general, but we also have a women-focused fund within that initiative. So I just think that it's really important as we think about investing in women, there is always the question of how. So how do we do it? And I'm really committed to 3 solutions before COVID, but even now more. And that is direct. So direct capital to women, not through intermediaries, not through any other entity, but giving them the funding directly. I'm committed to, and USADF is committed to being demand responsive. So not coming up with solutions, whether you're in New York like you are, Liz, or I'm in Washington, D.C., or wherever we might be, but demand responsive to the women who are on the ground facing the challenges and fighting the fight for conflict, the fight against COVID, the fight against climate change, and this really economic empowerment. So being demand responsive to them. And then I think in this new COVID era, where we're seeing the virtualization of everything. You now have hosted with Thelma a conference that had more than 200 people and no one left their homes or residences. And so we are in the virtualization of everything. And so we're gonna be focused on direct funding. We're gonna continue to be demand responsive, but we're also gonna look at digitization in a new way in all of our investments so that we can future-proof a lot of the women's businesses. And so this is about digital financial inclusion for women. They already unbankable. This is about capacity building and digital services. So those are ways in which we can still be direct, but also try to future-proof businesses by being demand responsive and providing them that capital directly.
Wonderful, thank you. And so please remember, keep chatting the questions. I'm seeing them and I'm writing them down, and we're gonna make sure that we get as many of them answered. But one question that's come up a few times that came in an email to me beforehand and also in the chat now is about the informal economy. People wanna understand how will governments, funders take into account the fact that most women entrepreneurs are operating in the informal economy. So I'd love to hear any panelist who has a thought on the informal economy and how we can formalize it to better incorporate women.
So overall, about 75 to 90% of non-agricultural employment in the informal sector, which are also low-paid employment, are held by women. So that is extremely important. In fact, in the specific case of sub-Saharan Africa, about 9 out of 10 employer women are in the informal sector. So specific policies should be adopted toward them. And when I say about the informal sector, so that also includes women who are playing a supportive and very vulnerable role because they will be supporting broader economic activity by perhaps your husband or your brother, siblings. They will not be officially listed. They will not receive any form of social services. So the integration of women is not just the right thing to do. It is also good economics. It is also critical for Africa's prosperity. So that is the very first thing. The second thing is that cash transfer is important. Now, many countries have made mandatory the presentation of ID cards before having a SIM card for a mobile phone commitment. So now more than ever, government can ensure transactions without necessarily having to send women to go to the or women or other vulnerable people to banks or amount order. So there are 2 or 3 factors. So digitalization. So and I think CD mentioned it. So digitalization really provide a unique tools, both in terms of access to finance, in terms of access to market, and also in terms of access to social services. In the case of Kenya, the Thunderbird School of Global Management is, for example, partnering with many actors, including the government, to provide data and insight on how the 4th industrial revolution and its disruptive technologies could help integrate women, including from the informal sector, or monitor the development of the vulnerabilities so that the government will be adopting the most appropriate solutions. So I think that one of the solutions, instead of simply thinking of formalizing the informal sector, which should happen, but the unique opportunity offered by disruptive technologies allows now to provide immediate solution. And the case of universal health coverage where some companies like MTBA, for example, in Kenya are providing, including to the very poor people, the opportunity to have health coverage. So government could really leverage on those technologies to offer clear solution, direct transfers, safety nets, also market access, creating platform to sell and your products. And those will lead potentially to the formalization of the economy.
Cool. Yes, please.
Liz, so I think this is a really important question because Africa is rapidly urbanizing, but right now it's still predominantly rural. And so when you look at how do people in rural areas earn their livelihood, 2 things happen. They either earn their livelihood from the land or through their hands. It's either agriculture or some kind of artisanal handicraft sort of industry in rural areas. Now, if they get electrified, it changes. But literally, you're talking about agriculture. 70% of all Africans earn their livelihood somewhere along the agricultural value chain. 70% of them are women. In the artisan industry, the 2nd largest employer of rural urban people, which are predominantly women in terms of artistry, artisans, handicraft, those sectors. So we have to think about, as Landry said, no matter what happens in terms of the numbers of cases or deaths for corona in Africa, the continent is impacted because of global supply chains writ large, just because of market access and supply chain distribution. And the same thing in rural areas, the same challenge. There's an urban demand, but production is happening in rural areas. And so that lack of connectivity now that we're all experiencing with lockdowns and things are going to hemorrhage certain economies. And so as African women are empowered, the African economies grow. And if they aren't empowered and invested in, then therefore you're going to see a deeper downturn. And so we're really focused around agriculture. And then COVID has really taught us thinking about transportation, logistics, tourism, and handicrafts. You're going to see a lot of investments in those areas because they need to be shorn up, but they're also going to be huge job losses in there. 90% of the income that African women earn, they plow back into their families. So that has ripple effects from education, health, the entire societal impact. Men, sad to say, we only reinvest in our families about 30 to 40%. So again, investing in women, that is going to invest in livelihoods and going to invest in families. And so we won't have health disparities. There are a number of things that we see. But when we think about formalizing the informal, we still have to think about the sectors that aren't as sexy now, and everyone's moving away from agriculture and the average age of a farmer is 60 years old, but we have to invest in agriculture now, productive driven agriculture that has irrigation and processing and storage linked to it through electrification, but agriculture and rural handicraft and artisan industries are still the drivers of rural economies in most of the economies in Africa.
Great. Thank you. We have another question. I think I'd like to address this one to you, Thelma. So it's a question about interest rates in Africa, and will the impact of COVID-19 impact and decrease the cost of funds for women SMEs in Africa, since interest rates are way down since COVID in Western countries? So the perception of risk in investing in Africa is high. How do you address that in your work?
Well, I think one of the things that the central bank did was to put a moratorium on loans for this period. I mean, we want to see how long that will last, but we're watching the financial sector and looking at banks. Banks are strained. Microfinance banks are going to be particularly strained. This is where women, commercial banking, where women would typically go to, right? And that source of traditional financing is going to either dry up or be very stringent after a while. This, more than ever in Africa, I have to really say I like what is happening as a response. Our advocacy is always very fractured, if I can use the word, but I'm seeing a lot more Africa-wide conversations saying no country can deal with refugees from Nigeria, none, so you can't just focus on your country. You have to look at our borders are porous, so how does this affect the continent as a whole? And so for interest rates, right now they're low. It's still very high if you compare to the rest of the world. We're looking at high single digits or even low double digits. That's very high compared to the rest of the world, but it's low for us in Nigeria. The problem is not even that this money is available, but you are made to jump through hoops to access it at a time when you're focused on survival. And one of the things we must not forget, for women is more than just the business. The business also represents a psychological outlet from the home. Women leave their homes and all the problems in their homes to go to their businesses. Now they don't have that break. They're in the house all the time. I mean, I'm addicted to CNN, God help me, watching all the time what's happening. And they're talking about the psychological effect of the virus. We're not talking about it so much, but it is going to be important to watch what that also happens to women and how that will affect overall livelihoods. So the question about interest rates it's fine now in comparison to what it was previously, but you can't even access the money. Right? For a country like Nigeria, the government put out 50 billion naira facility for SMEs. That's nothing. And I'm not surprised it has dried up. But even how people access it, we were inundated with questions. People saying, look, how can I get this money? How can I get this money? I don't even need a lot. I'm looking for the equivalent of $10,000. Can you imagine? To save my business, to save my family. And like Sidi said, exactly, women feed their homes. Women traders and women micro businesses are the link from the farms to the tables in most African homes. If these women don't go to the market, you're not going to get your tomatoes, your peppers, your onions, whatever. And somehow we focus on people that can use Zoom and people that can use all the facilities. But day-to-day African life is going to be affected. I'm doing a research right now, which I'll publish an article, just looking at how our ordinary lives, the things we take for granted are actually perhaps the most important, such as the market woman, and how we generally are not looking at that, And then the other thing I want to talk about in terms of how access to finance, because that's where I sit and that's where I work. When we think about, the World Bank is still working through financial banks, everyone, African Development Bank still working through banks, You realize that nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. And, I see a number of women in this group that are part of a continent-wide network of women investors and women funds. These women are strategically positioned to support other women. And we're missing that opportunity. I see in the US that a lot of the funds in the US are working with the Small Business Administration. That's really the way it should be. I mean, we don't have such partnerships here in Africa. And that would be another recommendation that I think, there should be partnerships with groups and financial investors that directly work with women. Because what happens is, and I'm sure, Sidi, you encounter this, how do you avoid funding the same people over and over and over again? It's really a challenge. And of course, you fund good businesses, you build trust with them, but many times it's the usual suspects that get all the money. And many businesses that cannot access Zoom, cannot write the best proposals, but are integral to our communities, do not receive financing. And you know, Her Excellency said something that I really believe, and that's the lens through which I've been looking at COVID. I think is an opportunity to right a lot of wrongs on the continent. And it's an opportunity to restructure things. And one of the things we must restructure is access to financing. This is the time that grants should be on the mouth of any financial institution. A portion of their portfolio should be dedicated to giving out grants, just so that there is a sector called women-owned businesses after all of this. When we're done with that, then we can start to talk about your loans and your 12% interest rates or 23% interest rates. That conversation right now is moot, because right now people are talking about, I can't even get the money at 23%. So what is the argument? And so, you know, I'm reading some of the questions. There's a question for CD that I think he should answer, because I think that was, a lady's asking, you mentioned only Rwanda and Nigeria. Does USADF work in other parts of Africa? I think we need to help people with practical solutions. I'll tell you, for us, as SME.NG, people are asking us to go outside Nigeria. Believe me, Nigeria is enough for us. But what we can do is the lessons we learn, we can share with our sisters and brothers. And one of the core lessons we've learned through this period that we're practicalizing is that you need to create a quick injection portfolio, and that people can access in 2 weeks, and you deploy within that period, from due diligence to disbursement. That is what we're looking at. And we believe that is a recommendation. If you're a fund right now, start to think around that. Another thing I want to put on the table, and I think this is also, we're all guilty of this, but I put on the table because CD is here. We should stop working in silos, because sometimes it may just be a waste of resources. We'll end up duplicating what each other is doing. There must be a way to coordinate, a way to look at, okay, so if you're working in Ghana, who are the actors in Ghana? How can we, you know, channel resources to the informal, but also the formal? So these are the things that we are grappling with and trying to answer. And I think those are the recommendations I'll put on the table. Grants, 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 grants. Thank you.
Liz, so three quick points. I'm looking at the time, and I know you're stressing a little bit. So
I have a few more questions, but that's okay.
Okay,
Please.
perfect. No, I'm here. So one, in terms of countries, so USADF operates across 21 countries in Africa, primarily focused on the Horn, the Sahel, and Great Lakes regions. So I mentioned Ghana. I'm an entrepreneur in Ghana. I mentioned cooperative in Rwanda. I mentioned a business in Lagos, and businesses in Nigeria and in Kenya. But we operate in 21 different countries. And through the YALI programs, the Mandela Washington Fellows programs, we have grantees and investments in 31 different countries. So just info at usadf.gov. We'll put you in touch with our country program team, and that will be an easy connection in terms of accessing information around USADF and where we operate. Thelma nailed it with collaboration. And then she talked about collaboration between, in the US, SBA, Small Business Administration, and maybe investors. I want to really talk about the importance of collaboration between philanthropic funders. My background before USADF, I was with the Rockefeller Foundation, that's on the front lines of addressing COVID, and you should look at what the Rockefeller Foundation is doing. They're doing some amazing things to respond in the US and globally, and also in off-grid energy as well. But in terms of collaboration, the philanthropic space needs to work with, and the investment space needs to work with one another. Like, we need to see this as a capital stack. And so grants, I can tell you, over the past 10 years, there's actually been a de-emphasizing of grants, a looking down upon grant funding. Everyone is impact first, and impact first means returnable capital. And what we've lost, and what this is gonna course correct, this reset, in terms of COVID, is gonna reset that mindset. As Thelma has mentioned, grants are important, entry into markets is important. De-risking capital is important. Catalytic capital to start up businesses and help them scale is important. And USADF plays a role in terms of community organizations, community businesses, self-help groups that want to become cooperatives, cooperatives that want to become producer groups that want to sell their coffee into Starbucks or sell their shea butter products into Whole Foods in the US. I mean, we have to look at this as a capital stack. We have to look at this as enterprise progression. And most big companies that you know today, they all started at some point with some kind of non-diluting capital. That non-diluting capital is called grants. And so Google didn't get started as this behemoth of Google. They got started with public funding to research and R&D. And so why are we saying African women and African enterprises and African entrepreneurs can't start with grant funding and then be followed on by impact investors and others? So I think the reset that Her Excellency mentioned and that Thelma mentioned in terms of capital is going to really happen. And those of us who provide grant financing linked with investment capital are going to be more important than ever. So that's why I want to hit on the capital and the collaboration, and then obviously the countries that we operate in. Great.
Thank you. So I'm going to just ask everyone, we are out of time. I cannot believe how quickly this went. Really, really great. I'd like to ask everyone just for, quick final words. And yeah, especially just make sure to leave us with one last thing you want us to take away. So how about I start off with Professor Landry? Why don't you kick us off with the final words?
Yes, thank you very much, Liz. I have greatly enjoyed this panel. Thank you, Signe, Thelma, and all the other speakers. So one thing which is extremely important, I think has been highlighted by everyone, is to invest in women, to provide resources available in the shortest time possible. It is not just the right thing to do, but it is also great for economic development, for social development, for families. And connected to that, Liz, sorry if I'm throwing a little bit a hot thing to you, perhaps a web page could be created on your website, which identify grants, investment, or impact investment available at the international level, including the one from Signe and Thelma, but also others available at the continental and local level. And I'm sure that will drive a lot of people because those resources are often not accessible for many people. So you can be the integrator.
Thanks for the idea. Appreciate it. Everyone, please make sure to go buy Professor Landry's book. It is available on Amazon. It is available in Barnes & Noble. So it is here.
Africa Business Potential. Unlocking Africa Business Potential.
There we go. Please go buy it. Thank you. All right. So CD, last words. Let's do one minute, maybe 30 seconds because we're over by a minute. You're on mute.
Oh my God, sorry. Yes, invest in women, but let's look at integrated solutions. So we want to look at the capital that they need. We want to look at the capacity building and training support that they need, but also the network and connection. So this is about money to them. This is about business support and management to them. And this is about mentorship amongst them. And also, let's not, as we look at this as an urban challenge that Africa is facing, let's also not forget the grassroots and forget about the informal and rural areas that are more dependent upon, needed now than ever by the urban areas in Africa. So let's get this linkage between the urban and the rural stronger. And just thank you, Liz, for this great opportunity to share what USADF does, but also to put on the front burner the importance of investing in women. As African economies go, that's how women will lead.
Thank you. And then finally, Thelma, the co-organizer of this amazing panel, such a champion for women. You are I'm just so blessed to work with you on this. And Thelma, please close us out with another nugget of wisdom for all our listeners.
I think this panel was not because we had any answers, but we wanted to be part of creating solutions. I think, Liz, when we started thinking about doing this, that was the avenue we came to it too. And I think for us as SME.NG, because I talk to women entrepreneurs every day, it's heartbreaking to hear what's happening, but we're still a business. So we are looking for viable businesses. We can't help everyone, but we're going to help the people that we can. I think this is a period for education. So that was why I was really happy to have Prof join us, because I'm buying your book as soon as I leave this webinar, and I'll plug it over here as well, because I think we mustn't forget that this is the learning opportunity for Africa. If we don't get it right after a virus that didn't respect any country, I don't know when we're going to get it right. The hunger lines reminded me of post-war Liberia, the hunger lines in Lagos. This is a dire situation, and it requires all hands on deck. And our hands are on deck. We're looking to work with anyone who's willing to work with us. I see people asking to collaborate. We're very happy to. I have to always promote my sisters across the continent who are also doing this work of, working in a male-dominated sector, being a women-led fund. And there's so many women-led funds across Africa. They need support. Some of them may die out. We are lucky that we have investors in our fund, but some of them may not survive this as well. So I can't end without saying, investors that are on this platform, and please look at women-led funds. They're very integral to the investment landscape in Africa. It's also a way of creating gender equity in access to finance. I want to specifically thank the speakers. Thank you so much, Signe. I'm oppressed by all the books you have behind you. I should have put books behind me. Professor, thank you so much. My sister Almaz, who had to, keep her board members waiting just to show her face. And of course, Her Excellency Liz, fantastic job as usual. I'm sure we're going to do something else before all of this runs out. And to all the participants, I am so humbled and gratified that you could join us. I hope it wasn't a waste of your time. We're going to share links for grant opportunities to everyone who registered, so it doesn't end here. And please, stay safe, and God bless everyone.
Couldn't have said it better myself, and I won't try. So on behalf of SME.NG, the funding space, and Baobab Consulting, thank you for joining us, for being part of this conversation. Big thanks to our speakers, to Her Excellency, to Signe, to Landry, Thelma, Almaz. It's truly a pleasure, and we will make sure to follow up and figure out the ways to address these questions and continue the debate. So from Brooklyn, goodbye. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Have a good night's sleep, wherever you are in the world. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.